Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. She's hiding, but she is there. There's Nisha, star of the show. Thanks for joining us, Nisha. Thanks for taking time out of, but yeah. Wants to run.
He moved.
With Nisha, unfortunately, you get one, you get that other one. With Nisha is
Prateek Singh.
And my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thanks so much for joining us. Prateek, what are you drinking tonight?
Oh, today we are with Prohibition Style Old Forester. Again, my favorite Old Forester. It's 57.5%. So we are good with this.
We're safe. We're safe.
Yeah, we're safe. We're in the safe zone. It's just a beautiful, sweet bourbon.
So I've been last couple episodes, I think I've been talking about how I'm trying to limit my whip on my whiskey. I'm back to the Blair Athol. Trying to make my way through this. As you can see, I really only drink this stuff on Drunk Agile, so that's why it's taken me a little bit of time to get through it. Not to say it's bad. It's a really good whiskey. But you know, I don't know, whiskey in 93 degree weather don't really go.
Yeah, they don't. You have to be indoors when you're in Florida.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think if it's okay with you, I'm going to set up the conversation tonight, and then I'll just stand back and let you run, and then obviously correct everything that you say. That's kind of our formula. That it's a formula that works for us.
That's the format.
Yeah. Why stray from that?
Why try to improve perfection? Yeah.
So this has come up in a couple of trainings that I've done recently. This idea of teams trying to define their work items, and specifically development teams wanting to define their work items as pull requests. And the implications, is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Does that even make sense? Blah, blah, blah. So I guess let's just start with that, and we can maybe dig into the nuance of can a pull request be a work item, and all the kind of the tangential things that we need to discuss. So Prateek, take it away. Can a pull request be a work item in a Kanban system?
So short answer is yes, and long answer is it's complicated. A pull request, for those not familiar, represents a set of code that a developer is proposing becomes part of the main branch where development is happening. So I am, as a developer, have been working on something, trying to write some code for a story, for a work item that I have, and I believe I'm at a good place with this, that the story can move forward. I'm going to submit a pull request, and then people are going to review it to say, yeah, this looks good, and the work item can move forward. At the basis of it, that sounds like, yeah, it makes sense. It's moving a work item forward. You could potentially define a story with a pull request. The life cycle of the pull request can potentially be a story. Yep.
So yeah, let me jump in there, because the argument that these people are making, that is not necessarily wrong, but the argument that they're making is that if a work item is supposed to be defined in terms of value, that the value, the tangible value, is the code that's checked into the main branch that ultimately gets deployed. So why wouldn't that PR, because that PR is what's encapsulating value, why wouldn't that PR be the work item? That's actually fairly sound logic, right? I mean, that in and of itself is okay. However, you potentially quickly get into some problems, and these problems, as we go through some of these problems, we're not saying that they are good or bad. They're just things that you need to consider, and they're things that you need to think about. This is kind of following on our policies discussion. So let's talk about that. How do we get into trouble? How do we mitigate some of these problems? I don't know. Can you walk us through some of those things?
Yeah. Let's say that we started work on a work item, and this work item was build this web page. A PR for that work item could potentially be the developer going through and building the entire web page out, doing the entire plumbing, and let's say this web page takes user address information, writing all of that code, and then saying, okay, this is all good to go. the address is being stored and everything. I'm going to submit this PR. Yeah, in that case, that work item that's moving forward. The potential issues here are, it is possible to take that one work item and break it up into multiple things. Does your workflow or your process policies allow for that? Do they allow for this thing to be broken up as it's flowing through and go, hey, we thought this could be one PR, but we're changing it into 10. Does that mean we need 10 different work items, or do we still keep these 10 PRs with the same work item? I would err towards 10 different work items, but those are the process policy questions, as Dan was mentioning, that we should be asking. What is our PR to work item ratio? And if it is 1-to-1, what does it mean to break a work item up once it's in flight?
I was hoping you would get to the PR to work item ratio, because I think that's the crux of it. Because I mean, are your PRs just a single user story, or a single single PBI, whatever you want to call it, or do your PRs contain bits and pieces of 15 different work items, none of which are actually complete when they go into the PR? That code might be ready to be checked in, and you should probably be checking in that code, but it doesn't represent the actual completed value, whatever. So that's, to me, that's one question I think you need to ask yourself is really what does that PR represent? And we were talking about this before. That kind of, if you take that to its logical conclusion, that kind of assumes. Can you talk about what that kind of assumes in relation to, say, like acceptance criteria?
Yeah, it kind of assumes like that. First, every item has a set of acceptance criteria, and once you start breaking those things up, you quickly get to a place where we were talking about in terms of limits. The limit approaches 1 when it comes to the ratio of work items to acceptance criteria. I don't want to say that every work item should be 1 acceptance criteria, because I do not think that's necessarily possible at all times. But as much as possible, we want to limit the number of acceptance criteria with every work item. And then we can easily get to the point of, oh, this PR satisfies that acceptance criteria, which means that work item can now move forward.
That seems really strange that we would say that, because we're, such fans of small batches, that we'd say, 1 work item is 1 acceptance criteria is 1 pull request. That just seems really strange that's the conclusion that we would draw, right?
Yeah.
You were before we talked, you were mentioning something about tooling too. I don't know if you want to get into some of that.
I mean, there are certain tools that kind of make it easier for you to define your work items as pull requests. Tools like GitHub and GitHub projects kind of by default tell you, oh, each pull request becomes an item. So yes, it's totally doable. That it helps you do that and almost coerces you in that direction. So if your team wants to run a process where pull requests are not work items, you might have to look at other tooling for that stuff. There is the other side of this, which is, again, what other policies do you have in place that force you to only work with pull requests? The reason people do pull requests most of the time is to do code reviews, to review those pull requests. And that's where I find it more interesting. Now code reviews become the central part of your process. And I have many things to say about that, but I'll pause.
Well, that's interesting. That's maybe another episode. We should probably get we want to limit our work in progress here. We want to scope this just to pull requests themselves. So I mean, I don't know what else. Is there any other guidance? Is there any other landmines that we should tell people to watch out for if you're wanting to tie pull request to work items. Again, not necessarily a bad idea, but are there other things that we should mention?
The one thing that I would, the other thing that I would warn about, and this again, most of this comes down to how can we work in small batches. Let's say you had this pull request. I went in as a developer and, oh, this thing is easy. Get it done in a couple of hours. And I pushed it over, which is interesting that you usually push pull requests. He pushed it over and someone reviewed it and said, great, this looks perfect. Let's move it on. And then people start testing this and they go, oh, this is going to take us 20 days to test. Can we break this up into multiple small items that we can test? Well, your process should have the flexibility to allow for that. To say, okay, we had this one pull request, but that's now blowing up into 20 things. Do we keep this as one thing or do we split it into 20 things? Your policies will become important there.
Yeah. So, moral of the story, right? I guess I think the subtext for this conversation is we're essentially talking about two things. We're talking about batch size and we're talking about acceptance criteria, right? I mean, it's interesting. This episode is about pull requests, but we're really talking about batch size and we're talking about acceptance criteria, which I think in all our videos, we're talking about batch size and we're talking about acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So the moral of the story is, take a look at you. If you want your pull request to be that unit of value that you are flowing through your system, things that you need to look at, does that pull request really represent value? Is it as small as possible? Is it representing some acceptance criteria that is being achieved? Is it not bits and pieces of 15 different things that we're throwing together just because it's fairly convenient? Oh, by the way, hey, while I'm in there, let me do this other thing, right? It's so easy. I've got this file open. I'm going to make this other change, right? And so throw it into the pull request. Depending on your decisions around that stuff is going to be your bigger driver of whether you can use pull requests as work items or not. So it was just to me, it was just kind of an interesting thought that came up, and it seems to be kind of a fairly recurring theme in some of our trainings. Can you do it? Yes. Is it straightforward? No. I don't know. Do you want a final word?
I'll add one thing, and this might be homework for the viewers, listeners. Let's say you did start down this path, and then you discovered, which I think if everyone thinks about this long and hard, they will discover that pull requests might not be the most efficient way of delivering value to customers. Maybe there's something else where we're pairing, mobbing, and working off, doing something like trunk-based development, and that makes things faster. Do not, just because you've defined units of value in terms of pull requests, do not close the door on things that might make you a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but yeah, an interesting point. That's maybe the ultimate reason why pull requests maybe aren't necessarily a great idea. Not a bad idea, but not a great idea, because it might limit your thinking in terms of where you can look for process improvement. What do you think? Do you agree with what you're saying, with what we're saying? Do you not agree with what we're saying? Do you have different thoughts in terms of pull requests and workflow and work items and things like that? Please leave us a comment on this, on the video here. For Nisha, who is still there. She hasn't run away. Yep. Oh, there she is. Hey, Nisha. For Nisha, for Prateek, my name is Janet Vacanti. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you in the next episode. Good night, everyone.